High Representative of the EU for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Vice President of the European Commission, President of the Socialist Party in Belgium and Mayor of Charleroi, members of the European Parliament, permanent representatives and ambassadors, Director General of Communication and Spokesperson of the European Parliament, President of Secretariat Wallois, Director of Cervantes Institute and other authorities, ladies and gentlemen. As General Director of New Economy International Forum, I am pleased to welcome you to this Forum Europa event. Following our inaugural conversation with the President of the European Parliament, presented by the President of the European Investment Bank, today we are honored to welcome Mr. Josep Borrell Fontelles, High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy and Vice President of the European Commission, one of the foremost exponents of the enduring commitment and dedication to the European project. He will be introduced by Mr. Paul Magnette, President of the Socialist Party in Belgium and Mayor of Charleroi. Thank you very much, Mr. Borrell, Mr. Magnette. New Economy International Forum was founded in the year 2000 by my father, PhD in journalism, as an organization for political, economic and social analysis and debate. Since then, it has demonstrated a deep pro-European vocation in 6 different Spanish cities with 200 events per year under the registered trademark Forum Europa, bringing together speakers from all political parties, governments, the main European and global institutions, as well as business people, representatives of civil society and the media. A non-partisan, neutral meeting point where ideas and proposals can be shared in a cordial and constructive atmosphere. My father and I, President and General Director of New Economy Forum, have decided to start its activities in the capital of the European Union, coinciding with the final stretch of a legislature that has been marked by the coronavirus pandemic, the geopolitical and geoeconomic tensions, and the proximity of the elections to the European Parliament in June, which demands spaces such as this Forum Europa to exchange ideas and proposals for a new paradigm. As our slogan says, ideas to strengthen the Union. This initiative is possible thanks to the sponsorship of 5 companies that also demonstrate their strong commitment to Europe and European citizens every day: Airbus, AIG, Solaria, Indra and Telefonica. We would like to thank them for their essential contribution to this project. Without further ado, I give the floor to Mr. Paul Magnette, President of the Socialist Party in Belgium and Mayor of Charleroi, who will introduce our guest speaker, Mr. Josep Borrell. Mr. Magnette.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, in all your capacities, and thank you for your invitation. When I was asked by the Forum Europa to come and say a few words to introduce Josep Borrell, I of course immediately accepted, not only because I know this is a beautiful setting and a very prestigious audience, but also because I've had the chance to know Josep, Pepe for his friends, for I think more than 25 years now, in a former capacity when I was an academic, director of the Institute for European Studies here in Brussels, and Josep came very, very often with us to talk in seminars, in conferences about the future of Europe. He was then already, and he still is today, one of those rare politicians. Whoa, sorry, it's okay. One of those rare politicians who not only take time, but also I know it takes pleasure to discuss with academics and with the public at large about those very important challenges. I won't say a lot of things about the long career of Josep Borrell. If you want to know more details, you do like everyone does. You go to wikipedia.es, Josep Borrell, and you find all his very, very long curricula. Take at least 1 hour to read the whole page. And you will see that he's made long studies as an engineer, as a mathematician, as an economist, that he's traveled a lot all around the world, that he's lived in France, he's lived in Israel, even in his young years, he's lived in Argentina, and he's got a global experience that is very rare in the political world, even at this wide level. He's had a very long experience at national level too. Very young, he became a minister in charge of the fight against fiscal fraud. That's a very important challenge already then, under González. Then he became minister in charge of public work and transport, an MEP, of course, a very, very memorable president of the European Parliament with very strong positions and very strong speeches at the time, Minister for Foreign Affairs under Pedro Sanchez, and finally, the cherry on the top, the voice of the European Union in the world, the High Representative of and the Vice President of the European Commission, and a very powerful voice in the world in all those issues. Josep is also an academic, a real academic. He's produced more than 12 books. He's published books about economy, of course, about European integration, about the future of social democracy, because he's a very committed and convicted politician, not just someone who occupies functions, but also someone who defends strong convictions. And he's even written a book about climate change, which shows that the wide of his interest is very, very impressive. And this explains why, when you listen to Josep Borrell, you not only listen to a very important representative of the European Union, you listen to someone who is a man of a very wide and deep culture, a man who's lived and traveled all around the world and has got a real international and cosmopolitan view about the world. And this is quite rare. Let's recognize it. In the European Union, we Europeans are much too often provincial in our vision of the world. When you listen to Josep, you feel that when he speaks with the Arab countries, he's able to understand the viewpoint of the world of the Arab countries. When he speaks with African countries, he's able to understand that sometimes what we Europeans see as the global and universal vision of the world is not understood as universal, but that you have to understand the viewpoint of each and every region of the world with the lenses of the people living in those regions of the world if you want to be a powerful representative of Europe in all this world. And in this pleasure that Josep has always had to discuss with academics, with politicians, but also with students, he's created an incredible initiative 25 years ago in Santander, a beautiful, absolutely beautiful place, an academy where he spends, well, at least a week or 5-6 days every year, inviting people from all around the world to think very freely, very out of the box about the future of the world and the future of the European Union. And I've had the chance to take part in this beautiful Santander Academy last summer and to spend a few days with Josep and his wife and very nice dinners too. And I remember one of those conversations, which I think is maybe one of the things which illustrates the strength of the vision of Josep. One of those evenings, Josep told me, I asked him, what's your next meetings in September? And he told me, well, I have a long journey in the Middle East and in the Arabic countries, because I'm really concerned about the evolution of the situation in the Middle East. And he was taking at that time, end of August and September, initiatives to try and build bridges, to try and convince the countries of the Middle East and the Arab countries of the area to build some kind of economic community, as the one we did, we here in the European Union, to try and convince them that building those material solidarities, those strong economic bridges would be the best option to avoid the war. He was really concerned, he told me. And a few weeks later, when on October 7th, we all saw those terrible images, I thought of Josep, and I thought of the prescience you had, my dear Josep, my dear Pepe, the foreknowledge that you had that, yes, unfortunately, the European Union had maybe not been active enough in the last decades in that part of the world, and that we had to play a very important role. History has it that now you are the person who is in charge of doing that for the next month, and I hope that, although you will celebrate your anniversary sometimes this month, I guess that you will still play a very important political role, not only in Spain, of course, but also in Europe. You've demonstrated with your wide culture, with your wide knowledge of the world, with your incredible political experience, with your talent, how we need people like you. And I wish you not just the best, but I wish you really to keep fighting for us for those beautiful ideas that you've been protected for all those years. Thank you very much, Pepe.
Buenos días, Bonjour, good morning a todos y a todas. Bueno, gracias por traer tu foro a Bruselas. Muchos de los que estamos aquí estamos acostumbrados a los salones de Madrid. Et maintenant, c'est bien que tu sois venu à Bruxelles pour nous faire partager la même expérience. Merci, Paul. Je n'aurais pas pu trouver un meilleur présentateur. Merci de ton amitié, merci de partager des choses. J'espère qu'on va se revoir cet été à Santander, si tout va bien. Merci, je vois beaucoup de gens connus. Je ne vais pas dire bonjour à tout le monde, mais merci d'être ici. Should I speak in English? Okay, well, I will speak in English. What a pity, no? Because Spanish is the second most spoken language in the world, and we have here the head of our institute to widespread the Spanish around the world. Thank you very much for being here. Well, what can I say? I could summarize remembering that when I started my mandate, I said Europe needs to learn to use the language of power, and that some years later, when presenting the strategic compass, I said another sentence which will be part of my heritage, Europe is in danger. Well, at that time, people smiled, saying, well, he's trying to sell his product. But now everybody agrees that Europe is in danger. And everybody talks about security and defense. It has becoming the issue. There is a couple of wars in our vicinity, and everybody is talking about the next steps on building European defense, which, by the way, I am in charge of, because my job is a high representative for foreign and security. And security and defense goes together. When I came here, everybody was looking at the foreign affairs part of my job, because war and security was not in the stage. Now more and more my time is being devoted to the security and defense. And I would like to summarize saying that security is something more than defense. Security is everything. We talk about economic security, talk about everything has a security dimension, because everything is being weaponized. But defense, on the hard meaning of the word defense, which is having military capacities, will be at the heart of the European policies. Maybe it will be the third act of the European project. And the last message is that we have to avoid the international dynamics of the West against the rest, or the rest against the West. Because what's happening in Gaza has presented ourselves in a way that the rest of the world don't understand. And the war in Ukraine, or against Ukraine, also has some difficulties for many people around the world to understand what is going on there. And we have to prove that when we say that something is a war crime somewhere, it's a war crime everywhere. And we have to try to avoid double standards, and to avoid that the rest of the world don't understand what we do or what the others try to do to us, in order to present a union based on values, which at the end is what the European Union is, a union based on values. And the most important value is peace and solidarity, because our union was based on that, on peace and solidarity, building peace among the Europeans, base our union on solidarity and cohesion, and to try to be a force that pushes for peace and solidarity around the world. And for that, we imagined that trade was a good tool. And this German expression, transformation through trade, my German is very bad, Wandel durch Handel, which was based on the assumption that with trade and the dialogue will induce political and social change, has proved to be wrong when dealing with a dictator. And rather to achieve the effect of making Russia more liberal and democratic, this policy became a threat for us because we have become more dependent on Russian energy, and we learned that interdependencies goes both sides, and at the end, dependencies can become a challenge or a weakness. But at the same time, interdependency is at the heart of the European Union project. We started with coal and steel in order to make peace among us, and we have done a lot, and we should be proud of what the European Union represents in the world today. But once again, I want to stress the fact that we are union-based in principles. And I don't want to be like Groucho Marx, these are my principles. If you don't like it, I have others. No, these are our principles. We consider them universal, and we have to defend them everywhere. And today, Europe is really feeling the sense of challenge. We are being challenged. And that's why I'm saying that in the next step, or the next act of the European project will be very much related with building a common security and defense. Without exaggeration, without saying the war is imminent, it's going to start tomorrow, but making our citizens to understand that the US umbrella that has protected us during the Cold War and after may not be open all the time. That maybe, depending on who is ruling Washington, we cannot rely on the Americans' support and the American capacity to protect us. We have to build our common capacity. We have to build our own responsibility. Maybe responsibility is a better word than autonomous strategic autonomy, but at the end it means the same thing. The capacity to act, the capacity to defend ourselves, the capacity of facing the challenges which for us are more important. Certainly, NATO will be absolutely irreplaceable, but inside NATO, we have to build an European pillar. Because the war is there. It's not going to start tomorrow against us, but we cannot deny the reality. And the reality is that the rising competition among big powers, high-intensity conflicts between states, weaponization of economic interdependency, cyber warfare and disinformation are part of our reality. I think a couple of days ago, the defense minister of Germany said, I have to prepare Bundeswehr to be able to fight the war. And they have created another branch of the army, not only the air, the navy, and the land, but cyber security and information. They have created a new branch of the army in order to face a new dimension of the war, a new dimension of security. And at the same time, we see that the traditional sources of dispute, territoriality, sovereignty, national identity, are coming back with violent conflicts. What's happening in Ukraine and what's happening in Gaza is the old conflicts for land. people who claim this is my land, this belongs to me. We were told that geography doesn't matter because globalization has raised borders and canceled geography. Well, not true. Geography is here. And this is a fight for land, the old conflict for land. And we imagine to be in a world with a ring of friends after the fall of Berlin Wall, and it's being replaced by a ring of fires among us, of instability, from the Sahel to the Middle East, to the Caucasus, to the Baltics, not to look deeper into Africa, a ring of fires around us. And I think that we are living a very important moment in the European building, the European construction, because war is certainly looming in the horizon, and that's not a small matter. That's not a small thing. Because since 1957, the last colonial venture in Suez, remember, 56, 57, the last moment in which the European armies tried to make war outside their borders, since then, we have expelled war from our mindset. And we were very busy in building peace among the European nations. But today, war becomes a threat, and we have to look at that. We have to look at that, sharing with the rest of the world the capacity to continue building peace, because it remains our purpose. But we need something more than nice words. We need some more than trying to shelter ourselves from the turbulence of the world. We have to try to engage with the rest of the world on reducing these turbulences. And this means to build a stronger foreign policy and a stronger defense capacity. Trade is not enough. The core of sovereignty, foreign affairs and defense, this is the core of sovereignty, was left in the hands of a state. When you look at the institutional architecture of the European Union, foreign policy and defense remains a national competence. And it will be a battlefield between institutions on the next legislature. You will see that the intergovernmental branch and the communitarian branch will be fighting each other in order to occupy the political space. But today, foreign affairs and defense has left in the hands of a state because they wanted to keep the instrument of sovereignty in their hands, or because they collectively believe that NATO should be the guarantor of the collective security. And Europe was built on a dichotomy: economic integration left on the European Union institutions, and security left in the hands of NATO. And the end of the Cold War increased this split, because some European countries make this division of labor very evident, because in their public buildings, I've been visiting some of them, they had three flags: the national flag, the European flag, and the NATO flag, which is not the case on all members of the European Union. In French and Spanish and Italy, you don't have the three flags. You have only two. If you go to the east, the three flags are behind the desk of the governmental officials. So the fundamental question that we have to answer today is if we can continue to rely on this dichotomy, if we can continue relying on this division of labor. And my answer is no. It's no, because the war in Ukraine has brutally revealed the world as it is, and not as we wanted it to be. It's a world marked by the Russia threat to the European Union as a whole, even though Ukraine is not yet a member of the European Union, but it's a threat for the European Union as a whole. and we cannot dissociate the fate of the Ukrainian people from the fate of the European Union people, especially since Putin is determined to extend its destabilizing activities to the whole Union. And to destabilize is not only bombing. You will see in the next European elections how destabilization activities will be threatening our democracy. But the prospect, the possibility of a high-intensity conventional war in Europe is no longer a fantasy. And we have obviously to do everything to avoid it. But in order to deter the adversary, we need to have the means to do so. If you want nothing new, I was reading Robert Schuman's declaration. And Robert Schuman's declaration started by saying, and I am reading, world peace cannot be safeguarded without making creative efforts proportionated to the dangers which we are threatened. This was Robert Schuman. Peace in the world cannot be safeguarded without putting our efforts in a proportionate manner to the dangers that threaten us. It's nothing new, but it has become something new because we were used to a different world. And I think that the European Union is entering today in a third moment of its construction. The third moment, the third stage. The first was 1957, common market, with a limited number of European public policies. The second was the acceleration of economic integration through the single market and the single currency. And the third has started with the war in Ukraine, which will lead to the birth of a strong European security and defense pillar. The issue is, how should we do in order to achieve this new and ambitious goal? Well, as I said, until now, about war, ask NATO. Now it's not going to be enough. First, we have to fulfill our obligation, our moral and political obligation towards Ukraine. And there the situation is extremely difficult. The Russian military machine is running at full speed, at a considerable cost, but at full speed. There is a complete asymmetry between Russia and Ukraine. Russia can maintain a prolonged war of attrition and give the impression of having won it, when in fact they have been losing it. They arrive at 8 kilometers from the Ukrainian parliament. The Russian tanks were at 8 kilometers of the Russian parliament, Ukrainian parliament, the Rada, and they have been pushed back. Ukraine, by the contrary, needs to win in order not to lose. They have to win in order not to lose. Russia can afford not to lose in order to show that they are winning. So I make a call here, and I will do the same call to the Foreign Affairs and Defense Ministers in a couple of weeks, when we will meet in a jumbo meeting all together and make a call for increase the anti-air defense capacities for Ukraine in order for them to be able to stop the Russian missiles and the glide bombs that are destroying their urban infrastructure. We talk about Ukraine reconstruction. We should talk more about avoiding destruction. The best way of spending less on reconstruction is to spend more on avoiding destruction. And they don't have the capacity to avoid destruction because, to tell the truth, we should be doing more and quicker in order to make them have the capacities they need. I've been talking with Kuleba some days ago, and he is desperately asking for 7 Patriot batteries to protect itself, and it would be inconceivable that we are not able to provide them, given that the Western armies have about 100 batteries of Patriot. And still, we are not able to provide the 7 they are asking desperately. The second thing, for sure, is to talk about ammunition, which means to talk about our industrial capacity to produce more. And then comes the big question is, what kind of institutional setting we need in order to leverage the level of our ambitions on security and defense. I think that an Europe of defense will not from a great top-down supranational plan. Europe has never been built like this. We have to face the two problems that we have. One is a problem of expenditure. I mean a problem of money, a problem of resources, a problem of finance. And then we have a problem of collective action. How do we manage? How do we organize our collective action? We have a problem of expenditure because we have neglected defense and security issues since the Euro crisis, at least, or since the end of the Cold War. At the end of the Cold War, the Bundeswehr, this army that Pistorius says he has to be prepared for war, had 500,000 effective, 500,000. Today it's about 150,000. Well, number doesn't explain everything because maybe the kind of people that you need in the Cold War are completely different than the kind of skills that you need today. And conscription, having hundreds of soldiers, infantrymen not qualified is not the solution because you need very specific skills, maybe less people better prepared for the modern warfare. But certainly Europe has gone through a silent process of disarmament, at least since 2008. And now we have to increase our financial capacity. I don't know how. But it's the issue of public debt, like we did when we have an existential threat in front of us. Vaccine was an existential threat. And then we managed to go around the treaties in order to have the possibility of doing something that was theoretically forbidden, to go to the financial markets and ask for money because it was a matter of life or death. And during the Euro crisis, we did the same thing. The European Stability Mechanism was created contorting the treaties or creating new treaties in order to circumvent the unanimity because the Euro crisis was an existential threat. Is defense an existential threat today? It is the support to Ukraine an existential threat? If it is, then we should think wide, we should think deeper, as we have done in the past, everything that we consider that it was an existential threat. But I'm not going to go deep on that because I am not the Minister of Finance. I'm only saying that we lack resources. But the important thing is, and this is at the core of my job, is how do we bring our defense ambitions to change the institutional setting of the European Union. And there you have to understand that there are 4 different levels. The states, the cooperation between the states, the community action, and the strategic alliances, mainly NATO. And we have to play in these four fields. The states is the first level. At the beginning and at the end, there are the states. The states have armies. We don't have an army in Brussels. And we will not have the European army tomorrow. The states are the master of the defense policies. And I heard some heads of state and government saying to the Commission, we don't want a transfer of competences from defense to the community side. And the defense is a national sovereignty sign, and they don't want more transfer of sovereignty in this field. But we have to make each state to work and to engage with a 2% target. We are far away from that. But this target doesn't say everything, because this is too synthetic. You can spend more on defense tomorrow by increasing the pensions of the military. Yes, you spend more on defense, but doesn't increase your defense capacity. You can spend more on defense by doing more research and development, or by building the industrial capacities. But let me give just one figure. Since the beginning of the war in Ukraine, 80% of all arms buying, arms investment in Europe has been done out of the European Union. 80% has been bought to people producing out of our borders. And 80% of this 80% comes from the US. Well, this is a strong dependency. We cannot afford this dependency if we want really to be responsible. On research and development, we are very below our expectations. The trend is positive, but we need the second level, which is intergovernmental cooperation. More intergovernmental cooperation. We have done something, the European Peace Facility, for example, which has created a very positive dynamics in favor of Ukraine. There is a huge potential of increasing defense cooperation among member states. But I have to say that still there is a reluctancy to share technology among states, or a tendency in favor of the national arms manufacturers. I want me to be able to build my own arms, because you never know. And this is something, fragmentation of our capacity, which the US don't have, because the Pentagon is a big buyer, and we don't have a Pentagon here. And the members of the US are not suspicious of each other in order to look at where the armed capacity is being placed. In Nevada, Ohio, or Miami, it doesn't matter, from the point of view of trusting each other. Here is not the same thing. We have to create, I think, a new intergovernmental financing vehicle, let's call it European Defense Mechanism, comparable to the one that we created during the financial crisis to support some member states that were suffering from this financial crisis. The member state created the European Defense Agency, but they didn't fund it. They said, do it, but they have never been able to provide the European Defense Agency with a budget. And then the Commission, who has not the mandate but had the budget, come, and we have a certain duality, someone who has the knowledge, the military side, they know about arms, they produced reports for years that nobody was paying attention until the war in Ukraine, but they have never had a budget in order to influence the industrial capacity development. The Commission has a budget, and now it's using, it's good, in order to push for the defense industry development. But the industrial, or the heads of the industry, who are, maybe some of them are here, they told me, you know, give me orders. Don't build long-term strategies. Give me orders. If you pass an order, I will produce. If I have the prospects of having a demand, I will increase my production capacity to fulfill this demand. And this is something that we have to learn when we talk about the third level, which is the community level. The community level may do a lot in order to create a new institutional ecosystem to promote cooperation among the firms. It will take quite a long, but we have to do that. Otherwise, we will never have the capacity to produce at home what today we are buying outside. And finally, the fourth level of action, our alliances with NATO in first place. NATO is at the heart of our collective security. But NATO, too, has to adapt to the new realities of a world that is constantly changing. You know, for a long time, we have, or someone has been fearing or being afraid that the development of the Europeans' strategic responsibility, I'm saying strategic responsibility and not autonomy, will come at the expenses of NATO, and that move will directly or indirectly to encourage a decoupling between the United States and Europe. Now the risk of this decoupling is not coming from the development of the strategic responsibility from the European side. It's coming from the US policy. And I was very much interested during my last visit to Washington that the Americans themselves were applauding the development of the strategic responsibility of the Europeans. Yes, please, do it. Advance, create your own capacity. This European pillar of NATO will come. So the decoupling is not longer perceived as a risk, because the risk of decoupling is not coming from us increasing our capacity, it's coming from the lack of will of the other side of the Atlantic to keep the engagement to defend all the members of NATO in all circumstances. I think the European strategic responsibility is the best way to strengthen NATO, because NATO cannot remain credible unless the European members increase their military credibility, unless us increase our credibility. I think this is the main lesson that we can draw from Ukraine. And second, we must admit that within one alliance, within any alliance, the priorities of some of its members may change over time. And in fact, they are changing. The US went to the Pacific, and now they have to come back to Europe because of the war in Ukraine, because the main focus for them remains in the Pacific. And a more balanced partnership between the United States and Europe is required in order for each side to strengthen the unity of the alliance. I think that the US are interested in that because the European security is part of the security of the US. And don't forget one thing, the Pax Europea has been possible thanks to the Pax Americana. It wouldn't be peace in the European continent without the NATO preventing another war in Europe. And this combination of the Pax Americana has also covered something that we should not be very proud of it, but in any case has guaranteed a common defense capacity that has avoided war, because we had a deterrence capacity that now has to be increased and adapted to the new challenges of the world. My successor will have to work a lot on it. I'm sure that the institutional setting of the defense and security in Europe will be one of the most important political debates among states and with the European Parliament in order to decide who does what. And I think that everybody has to do a lot. Member states, each one of them at home, cooperating among them in the intergovernmental level, developing the community pillar according with the competencies of the treaty, and building a stronger partnership with our allies on the world in order to defend our values and to be recognized as someone who has real values. Real values means valuable in any circumstances. And today there is a strong criticism against the Europeans because it's not being perceived like that. So we have a lot of work in front of us. The next High Representative for Foreign and Security and Defense Policy will have a lot of work, but let's start today. Thank you.
Mr. High Representative Josep, muchas gracias. Thank you very much. I'm Chris Burns. I'm here to moderate the Q&A. I'm a longtime journalist, Euronews of late. And let me ask you one thing. And as you're preparing your questions on these cards, please send these cards up to us, or we'll be collecting them and bringing them. And for those also of you watching us streaming, Politico had a headline on you. It said, it called you Europe's undiplomatic top diplomat, compared to Mogherini, Ashton, Solana, speaking in much more frank words. How do you react to that? Do you think you are the undiplomatic top diplomat?
Well, it depends. What do you understand by being diplomatic? You know, diplomacy is no longer having coffee in nice places and good carpets. This is 19th century diplomacy. From time to time, you have to call a cat a cat.
Yeah.
If you want to be understood, you have to say, to name. Because I think it was, who said, it was Camus, it was Albert Camus, who said, not naming things, it only increases the misery of the world. You have to have the courage to name things by their own name. Otherwise, you are not contributing to solve the problems of the world.
Yeah, because perhaps there are cases where maybe you're taken out of context. Is that a frustration to you?
Well, this always happens, no? There's a camera who is taking every sentence. Any sentence I've pronounced today, taking alone, isolated, without the context,
yes,
can bring to different interpretations. But if you are, if you are under self-control, not willing to say anything that can be misunderstood, then I think that you lose a lot of interest. But yes, yeah. But misinterpretation can be done by two ways. One, in an honest manner, and secondly, and this is the dangerous part of the story, willing to disturb what you have said, not willing to understand what you have said, but to try to present it in a manner that distorts the message you wanted to pass.
The important thing is it has impact, and I think there is impact from your words. Let me ask you the first question here from Médecins Sans Frontières, Sergio Cecchini. I have a lot of respect for MSF because I've seen them in war zones and conflict zones, and sometimes they're the last flag you see before things fall apart, or as things fall apart. In Gaza, Sergio says, Ukraine and Sudan, attacks against hospitals seem to have become part of modern warfare. In 2016, the UN Security Council passed Resolution 2286 demanding an end to impunity for those responsible and respect for international law by all warring parties. Here's a question, what political leverage can the EU employ to hold those responsible for these violations accountable?
Well, we have a limited capacity to act in conflict like Sudan, or even in the conflicts which are closer to us, like the ones in Gaza and Ukraine. We have a program in order to support the people who support peace. We spent quite an important amount of money on political action in order to try to protect the protectors, to try to ask for the inviolability of the humanitarian workers. But unhappily, more and more, and the one who made the question has pointing rightly to the question, more and more they are a target. They are a target. Look, in Gaza, I think this has more than 140 humanitarian workers working for the United Nations bodies who has been killed. And we have been very moved by the last 7. Maybe because they were Europeans or Western people. Maybe not, but it has been a shock. But there are 140 before them. And then the Israeli Defense Forces has claimed that it was an error. Well, how many errors has been happening before?
Right. So what pressure can be brought to bear from the EU side?
Yes, we complain, we act, we have diplomatic channels, we put political pressure, but in some places, you know, in the conflict in Sudan, political pressure, what does it mean, political pressure? You have to be in the field, you have to be with boots in the ground in order to understand what's going on, what's happening. Because the war is so multifaceted, there are so many people fighting against each other, that to try to ask for the respect of international humanitarian law, we have to do it, and we do it, but it's quite difficult. In other places, it should be easier.
Okay, question here from the farmers, Jose Castilla. If Europe is in danger, as you say, what do you think about the farming sector? You speak a lot about security and defense, but what happens with sovereignty and, above all, food affordability?
Food?
Food affordability.
For whom?
With the sovereignty and food. What happens with food affordability and sovereignty when it comes to food, when it comes to farming? But that's not your domain, right? So
no, it's not our domain, but it's part of the idea that a strong dependency is a vulnerability.
yeah.
When the pandemic came, we realized that in Europe we were not producing a single gram of paracetamol, not a gram of paracetamol, because we have outsourced all the pharmaceutical industry on the basic products. Paracetamol, look for it in India. When the war in Ukraine came, we discovered that we don't produce powder in Europe. We don't produce powder. The powder is coming from China. And why? Because one of the things that you need to produce powder is cotton. And we don't produce cotton in Europe anymore because it's much less expensive to produce it outside. So you want to have your powder, you will have to have your cotton. And you have to revive some part of the agricultural sector that has been vanishing. Is food a strategic issue? Oh, yes, it is. Yes, it can become a strategic issue. So some sectors of the economic activity has to be protected because they have a strategic value, because they cannot be substituted by imports in a moment of crisis. And this is true for energy, this is true for food, but if you go too far away, then you are becoming cutting from the rest of the world. So you have to look for a balance of keeping the strategic production at home, and certainly food is one of them, and at the same time to participate in the world market.
Okay, here's a question on trade. Isabel Iglesias of SEDE. How will we ensure the right balance between ensuring the economic security of the EU and the need to continue being an open economy? Will we see tariffs making a comeback?
Yes, this is a big issue. When I'm talking about strategic autonomy, having immediately colleagues who say, set open strategic autonomy. Okay, I will say open strategic autonomy. I don't want to close. I don't want to become autarcy. No? When I was young, Spain was living in autarcy. Well, forced autarcy, because we were in a blockade for the rest of the world. No, certainly you have to be participating in the world trade, which is our trademarks. Europe is a trade power, the biggest trade power in the world. Our economy is the more open economy in the world, much more than the US. So nobody is asking for closing our borders and restrain trade and becoming protectionist. But there is a difference between protectionism and protection. It's true that you become protectionism because you have the feeling of needing protection. You need protection, and then you become protectionist. But you have to make the difference. You can protect yourself without becoming protectionist on the economic sense of the world. This balance has to be found, and by the way, we are not going very quickly because all the economic security proposals that we made from the Commission has not been approved by the member states. They are still under discussion.
Okay, next question on Morocco from Victor Tuda, Europa Press. You said trade and appeasement.
Trade?
Trade and appeasement has not been the solution to deal with dictators. So in the case of Morocco, well, that's a matter of opinion, a country behind cyber attacks, migrant flow, and military drills just near the Canary Islands, what should be the EU approach?
Well, we have very good relations with Morocco at the level of the European Union and at the level of the country I know best, I'm coming from. And I think it is in our interest to continue having a good relationship with Morocco. We do a lot in order to make that this cooperation allow us to have a look at the economic development of Morocco. Europe is the most important trade and investor partner with Morocco, and to try also to accompany the country on the internal political development. You know, we have a lot of instability in the Mediterranean facade, and we have to preserve the countries who still are politically stable. Stability is one thing. There are other virtues, other good things that we need in our neighbors, but at that moment, Morocco is playing a strategic role in the Mediterranean and with respect to the rest of Africa, and we have to keep our good relations.
Okay, this from Tatiana, very simple question on Gaza.
Well, you will not complain about my diplomatic skills, huh?
No, not yet, not yet. We can talk later about that. Simple question from Tatiana. What needs to be done now to stop the death in Gaza? What needs to be done now to stop the death?
I have a recipe which is for actions: release of hostages, ceasefire, much more humanitarian support, and start working on a political solution. I think these four things has to happen.
Okay.
The release of hostages is something that has to happen. Unconditional. I know how difficult it is. I know that yesterday they were almost there in an agreement on that, but they are almost there for weeks. Stop hostilities, stop fighting, stop killing. Massive humanitarian support, which cannot happen without stopping the hostilities, as we have seen with this tragic killing of these 7 humanitarian workers, and start working on a political solution, because even if Hamas is completely eradicated, it's not going to bring the solution alone, because look at what's happened in the West Bank. The security and peace can only come from a political solution. And this goes through a very difficult purpose, which is a two-state solution. I know very difficult, but I don't know a better solution, unless Israel wants to continue living under a permanent threat to its security, and the Palestinians continue suffering.
Right. Let's move to the Global South. Borja Kinel of the European Banking Federation. How do you see the Global South in the EU's foreign policy goals? In particular, how do they see the Ukraine war and the war in Gaza, or how they see the Ukraine war and the war in Gaza? How do we influence their public opinion and deal with undemocratic leaders in this geography?
You know, I lead with a lot of undemocratic leaders around the world.
Yeah.
If I only could work with the democratic leaders, I will start working at 12 o'clock. Instead of working until late evening. There are a lot of undemocratic regimes in the world. Some of them are being well considered and others not. So it means that being democratic or not being democratic is not the division lane on the public perception, because I can tell you undemocratic regimes that nobody's criticizing, and on others who are also on the, maybe more, maybe less, and everybody's blaming. We have to deal with the world the way it is, and we have to, to reach out to many undemocratic regimes, authoritarian regimes, autocratic regimes, not multi-party regimes, whatever you want to call it. Right. But the word, the expression Global South, I don't like it because it's too heterogeneous. There are too many different things inside the Global South. They don't present a united front from an ideological perspective or from the point of view of the geopolitical interest. It's an amalgam. It's a lot of people who doesn't want to take side, or they take side depending on the day. And they call themselves Global South in order to show that there is a new kind of non-alignment. Then we have to understand there are reasons and to go case by case in order to explain what do we want to do and how do we react. And certainly many of them consider that the war in Ukraine, yes, it's very bad to go against the Charter of the United Nations, it's very bad to invade the neighbor, but there is a but. And the war in Gaza, you can imagine.
Yes. A question from Isabel Fernandez of the European Investment Bank, EIB. You have mentioned the issue of money, of financing the EU's security and defense ambition. What would be the role, in your view, of the EU financial institutions, I guess like EIB? How would you avoid the debt considerations of EU member states?
The debt?
Debt considerations. Well, I guess among the frugals, for instance.
Yeah. Well, this is a debate, certainly. One thing is clear. The countries who spend less in defense are more or less the same that have stronger fiscal constraints. So if you ask them to spend more, they will be having the budgetary constraint because they are the ones who are more stressed from this point of view. And on the other hand, some people say that the contribution to the overall common security has to be taken into consideration as a way of financing a common good. And defense cannot be considered as any other expenditure.
That's the European defense mechanism, as you're suggesting,
I think that we need a way of pushing our defense capacity. We cannot expect this coming from the isolated efforts of each member state.
One other financial question, Rosa Armesto of the European Association of Exchanges. You mentioned that the European defense industry needs financing. What role can the Capital Markets Union play in that?
Well, in research and development, innovation plays such an important role in defense capacity development that certainly the capital, this is one of our weaknesses, the fragmentation of our capital market for everything, not only for defense. One of the reasons why we haven't been able to develop, one of the reasons, not the reason, but one of the reasons, is that we haven't been able to complete the financial market unity. We continue having a lot of fragmentation of our capital market. This makes a great difference with the US, and if we want to push for a better financing for the defense industry, we certainly have to finish, but it's not my portfolio, thanks God, the capital market structure.
Okay, switching over to energy, David Ridoli of Solaria. Are renewable energies part of the geopolitical weapons of the European Union? Can you weaponize renewable energy?
No, I don't think we weaponize the renewables. We don't weaponize it. But here again, our dependency is too high. We are completely on the hands of China for the most important part of the renewable development. 80 or more than 80% of the all solar panels that we use in Europe are being produced in China. We lost this industry, and we can lose other parts of this industry if we don't take into consideration that this is something strategic. And this comes the story of the critical raw materials and everything that is needed to ensure that the digital revolution being developed with a certain degree of autonomy. But we don't want to weaponize the renewables energy. No? Maybe we are suffering the consequences of others weaponizing it.
Okay, I'm trying to read this one. This is from Aigul Alberdi of Llorente and Cuenca. I think if I read that right. January 2025, Trump is U.S. president. Okay, and then consider Russia and China. How do we deal with them beyond deterrence, trade, and the Brussels effect? How do we deal with them?
How do I deal with?
With a world where Donald Trump is president in 2025, and considering Russia and China, their politics as well.
Well, we have already had Donald Trump in the presidency of the U.S. When I came to Brussels, in Washington, it was Donald Trump was in office, and we managed. And we will cooperate with the U.S., whoever is being elected by the U.S. people. Certainly, we'll have to deal with anyone that has the electoral victory. But as I said from the beginning, and if I haven't said it clearly enough, I try to do it clearly. The Trump attitude during his first mandate and the Trump perspective for a possible second mandate has been a kind of awakening for the Europeans. Trump has taken us out of the comfort zone. We were in a comfort zone, and we have been awakened by the fact that, we have to take into consideration the will of the American administration to continue fulfilling their commitments on our partnership.
Okay, I just have a couple of minutes left. Many more questions. I can't get to all of them, my apologies. But let's see here. A couple of European politics questions, if that's all right with you. You can bridge to how you want to answer these, but I guess we have to ask, this is from Irene Castro of El Diario, will we see you in Brussels next mandate? Has the Spanish Partido Socialista voted you to continue, asked you to continue as candidate in the next European elections? Would you repeat?
Repeat what?
I guess go back to the. That's what I'm reading here. Well, would you? The Spanish Socialist Party has asked you to continue as a candidate in the next European elections. Would you?
Look, I think everybody will understand that they have a job that they cannot abandon. I cannot say no. Now I am leaving the job of High Representative. It will be a responsibility because the situation is bad and it will become worse by summer. So I think the High Representative has to continue being High Representative until the end of the mandate.
Yeah, you've got a full plate. And then just finally, the amnesty law in Spain. You want to say anything about that? That's an internal politics question, right?
Internal politics about?
The amnesty law.
As you said, it's an internal politics question.
Yep. And you're already dealing with balancing the interests of 27 countries. I think that's a very big issue for you to deal with as it is.
Well,
our big hand to Mr. Borrell. Yeah, it was my journalistic duty to pose those questions at the end. That's just how it goes, and they were answered very well. Thank you, Josep, very much. So we have a couple of comments from, I think we go to Antonio now, right? Okay, and then back to Josep after that. Let's go to Antonio Pimentel, head of EU affairs at the International Airlines Group. Antonio, please, a few words.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the sponsors, I would like to thank Forum Europa for the exceptional organization of this event. We know that there's another one coming on 7th of May. We think it is an excellent initiative. Dear Josep, thank you very much for your wise words. I have taken duly notes of your words about independence, responsibility, open strategic autonomy. I like very much this comparison between protection and protectionism. We suffer that sometimes. We, European industries and sectors and aviation, we are competing in a globalized world. It's not a war, but we are competing with foreign entities. And we think we can also help on this collective effort around security and this responsibility that you were mentioning. Aviation is a vital sector in the European Union. We connect people, businesses, and regions across Europe and beyond. We foster social and economic cohesion. And at IAG, we are proud that we have this contribution. But we want to play this role, and we also want to, we are committed to do so in a sustainable way. This is our key challenge, and we have to do it without undermining the competitiveness of our sector and the affordability of these European airlines in the global markets. However, we cannot do this alone. Collaboration for us is key in this journey. If we want to retain a strong and competitive EU airline industry, we need a supportive and positive policy framework to facilitate the deployment of these low-carbon solutions. Europe enjoys a strong airline sector, but for us there is no doubt in all that you have mentioned that scale and consolidation for us is needed for European airlines to keep competitive, to deliver even better customer experiences, and to meet our ambitious sustainability goals. Thank you.
Antonio Pimentel, thank you very much. Thank you. Muchas gracias. And Josep, Mr. High Representative, a final word from you.
Well, I can only repeat what I said, that we needed a wake-up call, and we have got it. We needed it, and we got it. We got it by the war, and we got it by the fact that different presidents of the US can represent different capacities of ensuring the protection of the Europeans. And that's why I think that we have to take in our hands more and more our capacity to answer our challenges, internal and external. When I say this is internal policy, I don't mind that internal policy doesn't matter. Yes, you cannot make a clear-cut difference between external and internal. And the external is the projection of the internal. The external policy is the projection to the rest of the world of what you are and how do you perform. And we have to be aware that first, with the surge in inflation, the energy and the food prices, European people has been very much under stress. The COVID first, and when we were recovering from the COVID, the inflationary push has made a lot of people in Europe feeling bad. And this will have consequences for the next electoral cycle. So it's not only about how do we support Ukraine to win the war, it's also how do we take care of the imbalances inside our society. Because this situation provides a fertile ground for misinformation and destabilization of our democratic system. This is important. I think that we have to take care of that if we want to understand how the European citizens perceive the European Union as a security provider with the rest of the world, challenges, but also as a stabilizing power inside with respect to the challenges that, from the point of view of prices, from the point of view of work, from the point of view of everyday life, they feel.
Josep Borrell, thank you very much. And thank you to all the sponsors and Forum Europa, hashtag Forum Europa, for anything you heard during this last hour. A lot of good sound bites. I'm Chris Burns. See you next time. Thank you.